All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's feeling fine today. Medyo bad weather, malakas ang ulan. So, first things first, uh, just put a good afternoon in the chat before we start. Thank you. And so if I'm cutting out or lagging, I'll blame the weather for that. Um, we're near the finals, so if you guys still have anything missing in terms of submissions, please do remember to check Neo and then see if you've already submitted the items that you needed to submit. I've also released the guidelines for the final project. So we won't have a final exam, but we do have a final project. So you have until now until August 1 to submit it. Although I hope people do submit it earlier than August 1 so I can start checking that as soon as possible. August 4 is the submission of grades. So yun. You can get a partner for your final project. So just send me a PM if you are making the final project with a partner. To summarize what's in Neo in terms of the final project, it's basically an app. So you have to make an Android app because that's what we've been doing all term. Uh, but you don't need to make it this perfect, ready for Google Play distribution na app. So based on what we've learned, try to create an app that's somewhat useful or meron siyang use. Make sure you use any of our storage solutions, any of those we've discussed, shared preferences, SQLite, and then today, intro to Firebase. I won't really look too much into the user interface, but at least make it presentable. And yun, at its most basic. So don't overthink about what the app should be. Just have something useful there. Based again on the concepts that we studied. Ano pa ba yan? Future. Yun, that's it. Just check Neo if there are questions. You can always PM me or post in the FB group. So this afternoon, we look at Firebase and what it gives us in terms of options as far as cloud storage is concerned. It's very important to at least get a glimpse of what we can do with this. Because give me 1 second. Meron lang akong sasagutin na text. Hey, so yun, when you're doing a complicated app or one that's going to be used by a lot, you're targeting a lot of people to use it, and it has a lot of information like Lazada or some other Facebook for that matter. You won't consider local storage for that, or at least a lot of the information won't be going to local storage. It will be on the cloud, and you need to set up infra for that. So normally, especially when I started doing Android development, I've had to create my own backend. on the rare occasions that the people I'm talking to know what they're doing, I can ask them to make an API for their backend so that my app can talk to their backend. So yun. For those who are considering using an app as their thesis or capstone project, connecting to a database using your mobile app is not as straightforward as connecting to a database using normal stuff that you've learned, like on a website. When you're connecting it to a database, normally the database is residing on the same machine as your web server. So yung web server mo, siya na rin yung database server. So for all intents and purposes, the web-based items can talk directly to the database. So with apps, hindi ganun kasi your app will almost always never be in the same network as um, where the database is, or the user for that matter, won't be in the same network. So connecting directly to the database is almost always never going to happen. When an app pulls data from the cloud to the device, like when you're using FB, Instagram, a bunch of other apps out there, Pokemon Go, when they pull data from the server, normally that's done through APIs, application programming interfaces, and there are ways by which that API can be used to communicate with the app and send its data, which is normally in the form of JSON. So, so Firebase, um, Firebase is Google's. It's actually a free It's a free slash paid service because if you just want to play around and experiment, or you're doing your thesis and you're going like, paano kaya yung back end nito? Instead of paying for hosting and setting up stuff on your own, may options ba ako to have a backend that's almost ready and doesn't really require me to pay for anything. So that's what Firebase is. And so it says go to firebase.google.com. So for those who want to check it out themselves, you can go do that. As I talk through this before we actually do it in the app. Um, so firebase.google.com, I'll bring that up here. So this assumes, of course, that you're logged in to a Google account. The other thing I tell people is if you are using Android Studio and you were asked for a Google account, hopefully it's the same thing. The one that you're logging in to Firebase is the same login that you're using in Android Studio. Okay, so again, I'll repeat that for the purposes of taking advantage of this, the account you're using to log in to firebase.google.com should be the same account that you're using in Android Studio. So, ito, remember when we first used it, you were asked for a Google account. So, that's what you should be using to log in to this one. So, when you get to this one, um, you'll get their welcome page and then some short blurb about what it does, although it doesn't really give much. Yan. And then some stuff like targeted by the largest apps and games in the world like Trivago, Duolingo, Gameloft. I like using it. There are also actually limits to using it because Firebase for all its advantages, is a NoSQL database. So, kung sanay kayong mag-SQL and do things from the perspective of a relative database management system like SQL Server or MySQL, then working with Firebase will require some learning. So, it says get started. You can click on that or you can watch a demo video. For me, I just go to the console. So you'll see that on the upper right. And then you end up with this because I've been working on it. Actually, I cleaned this out and I put in some few projects to test if the stuff that I used to do was still working. So now I just have two left here. Then you can add a project here. Normally, when you add a project, it's because you want both iOS and Android to make use of it. Actually, even these existing projects, I can use that in other Android applications. So if I click on one, this is what you'll see, an overview. And then um, this actually lists down all the apps that are currently connected. Connected in terms of when the app is being used, it is, oh no, I shouldn't use the word connected. I should say registered with this Firebase project. So that means that when the app is running and it has need of a database, it is allowed to use this database. So there will be code in the app that lets it use it. So if I go, so you'll notice Firebase actually has a lot of features. If I go down here, the features of Firebase include authentication. So if you've ever want to create a login with proper authentication, Firebase has that feature for you. So if you turn on the authentication feature, when someone logs in, the login validation goes to Firebase and it can check, depending on the rules, a list of users and the password entered. There's Firestore database for storing more complex items. And then what we'll be using in the demo is the real-time database. There's storage, there's hosting, functions, machine learning, and a bunch of other features. So the thing we'll see here is just barely scratching the surface of Firebase. But most people like Firebase for this feature, the real-time database. So I'll quickly jump back to the presentation. So the presentation is available in Neo. So if you guys want to review it later on, you can download it from there. Just shows you some of the stuff that I'm showing right now. Firebase real-time database, which is just one of its features, is defined in this way. It's a cloud-hosted DB that supports multiple platforms. All the data is stored in JSON format, and any changes in the data reflects immediately by performing sync across all platforms and devices, allowing developers to build more flexible real-time apps with little effort. So the little effort is a bit tricky because if you're learning it, then it's not minimal effort. But once you get used to how Firebase real-time database works, then it gets easier and easier. So advantages of Firebase, it's real time with just a few lines of code. You can tell your Android application to update when changes are done to the database. It's accessible by a lot of things. There's an offline mode, and then it will sync once there is internet connection again. There's no need for an application server because the data is being hosted on Google servers, and you can also control access to the data. So as I've mentioned, Firebase makes use of JSON. This is a JSON record, a JSON object called company. It contains two attributes, which has name and address. So it's JSON structured. The entire database is a JSON tree with multiple nodes. We don't have the traditional tables or records as we see in relational databases. When new data is added or when a record is added, it's considered a node in the JSON structure. Then there's the rules for configuring the database. You'll see this later on. So the rules are also in JSON, and it just defines whether people can read and write, read and write to the database. So the first set of rule here, oops, my mouse has been acting up the whole day. So that first rule there just says that no one can read or write to the database. Second rule is everyone can read or write to the database. And then that last one, only people who have been authorized can read or write to the database. So that very quickly is Firebase. Yeah, so Paolo's correct. It's a NoSQL database. Paolo, do you want to tell us what NoSQL means? Or you can type it in chat.
NoSQL, ano ba? It's not like MySQL where it's a relational database. It's more of a well, I've experienced this kasi with MongoDB. MongoDB is also a type of NoSQL, and with NoSQL, they are considered yung mga tables in that database. It's called collections. So, at least sa MongoDB, it's called collections,
Yep.
and each record is not in a form of a row, but it's more of one big sa Mongo kasi it's called BSON, like binary something. It's called BSON for record storing. And iba din yung pag-declare ng schemas. Wala nang mga SQL queries, ganon. Well, meron,
Yes.
pero hindi siya ganun kagamit. Or at least in how I use it, I don't really use queries anymore. It's more on it's more on methods like from that schema itself. So since Firebase is also a form of NoSQL, I'm assuming it's somehow similar to how MongoDB works.
Yep. Thank you, Paolo. So it's something like that. If you guys are looking at my screen, let me get JSON. So JSON or JavaScript object notation for those who have been itching to know what the heck JSON means. Let me just find a good image. Well, ito na lang. So if you notice, there are curly brackets that denotes what we normally call a record. So yan, sales order ID. Yan. This is a JSON array. It can be called different things in different systems that use it. Like what Paulo said, Mongo is one of the more popular NoSQL databases. They've seen a growing trend because a lot of the data in this day and age don't exactly lend itself to the traditional relational model. So yung relational model, which is what we all learn when we start out, literally looks at relation. So if I have three tables like teacher, student, and classes, meron silang relationship. A teacher teaches a class, a student attends class. So between the three, yung unifying factor nila is the class. So if I'm getting data normally with SQL, then I write SQL statements that let me extract that information. Ano yung mga classes ni teacher based most likely on a primary key field on the teacher side so they can connect to a class and stuff like that. And if you've ever attended database concept classes as well as create your own system, that's most of the things that we are used to. Unless, like say, Paulo who luckily has had a chance to work with Mongo, and Mongo is one of the more popular na NoSQL databases, um, where the only thing that's important is storing the information, and the relationship between tables isn't that important. Um, Kaya siya NoSQL because it doesn't make use of the SQL programming language or most of the concepts in a relational database. So in the case of Firebase, it's the same. It's a NoSQL database, and it will make use of JSON as we saw on the slide. In fact, it makes use of JSON extensively, including creating rules for it. So this is a JSON object called company, and company has two attributes, a name and an address. So if you remember some of our discussions, this of course is a key value pair. The key is the name, and the value is Mindorks or Gurugram. So I've created a new project. I'll keep this Firebase thing up. And then I'll open my project. I'll run it so we can all see that it's a new project and it's running well. Also, so I can bring up my emulator. And for those who want to follow along, the longer code at the end is in the PowerPoint that I'm using right now. So you can download it yourself. Um, So as an example, this is the app actually that we'll be going through later on. But the first half is setting up the project's connection to Firebase. So we won't really need the code for this app yet. But again, if you want to um, follow along for the second half, make sure you've downloaded the PowerPoint for today from Neo. In Neo, you'll see there's a section there now for um, Firebase. Eh, so I ran. I'll go back to that app, which would be what this one will look later on. True. So this is the app. There are two text boxes, text views on top, to edit text with hint, and then a button to update user info. You'll notice that once I click here, this gets updated. It looks normal. It looks like something we've done before, but the underlying code will be using Firebase elements. Yan. In this case, the real-time database. So, so setting it up using Android Studio is easy enough. Except it was actually easier um, a year and a half ago. Ngayon kasi yung nangyayari is, and you guys will see this, what happens is before, when I do the connection from Android Studio, it picks up the correct configuration file. This time, after creating the Firebase connection, the Firebase database isn't there yet. So we have to update the configuration file before we run it so things work perfectly. Of course, you guys won't really have much of a context yet because you don't have it. So again, for those who want to do this along with me, just make sure you have a new project open like I have. And this is what I'll do. Well, first, to integrate also some of the stuff that we've done before, I'll just go to build the Gradle app, and then I'll add the item for view binding because that just makes referring to the controls easier. Sure. So again, I'm in build.gradle app. We did this. Shoot. My mouse has been acting up all day, so I'm trying to be careful not to delete anything by mistake. So we've been using view bindings, view binding. Hmm? So you want to do this, then I'll just sync. So every time you change build.gradle, it has to sync that so that when compilation happens, it becomes easier. Next thing I'll do is I won't change the app yet, except for this one. So if you go to tools, you guys will see Firebase there. And what that will bring up is the Firebase Assistant. And so that's why it's somewhat easy because you don't have to do stuff on your own. You let the assistant help you with most of the configuration, and then afterwards you just have to fix or tweak some of the settings so it works correctly. So you'll notice from here all of the features available if you want to make use of Firebase. So each Firebase project, so just to go back to this one, uh, every time I click my mouse, it becomes a double click. So it's acting weird. Um, and I can't find my extra mouse. So anyway, so so if I'm in a Firebase project like this one, Firebase demo code, it can make use or any app can use this project to connect using yung wizard. So there's about a dozen or more features there. A lot of times when you're beginning to explore Firebase, you go to real-time database or authentication. And so for our purposes this afternoon, it's real-time database. And you have two options. One is specifically for Kotlin. The other one, of course, is for Java. We want the Kotlin one. Double click again. So once you pick that, so real-time database and then real-time database Kotlin, so we get, why do we want to be specific? So the configuration of the project is the same whether it's Java or Kotlin. But for the assistant itself, you want to pick the correct one because the sample code here at the bottom will be different for that first choice. Yung walang Kotlin na nakalagay, it would be in Java. And Android Studio can actually translate, but we're we're going to remove that extra complication by picking Kotlin here. So dito sa assistant na to, you actually don't need to go up until step 7 if you're just trying to learn it or experiment with it. Yung important na steps lang is hanggang 4 actually. With 4 actually being optional because I just want to test if the connection is working already. So the first one is to actually connect to Firebase. And so you guys can see, I will put this side by side. So this is my Firebase. I'll go to home there. So this is my Firebase console. I'm logged in with my normal dev account for Google. You guys, again, should be using the same account that you used here in Android Studio. Should be the same one here. So now, when I do connect to Firebase, what this will do is open a new browser window. And then you'll notice that here, in Android Studio, it's just saying launching Web Connect Flow. So this will not disappear until we finish on the browser with this stuff. So what's the first thing that this needs? The first thing that any Android app making use of Firebase needs is an actual Firebase project. So I'll click on Add Project. And what it will do now is take me through the main steps. So there are only three steps. The first one is to name my project, or if I want if I want to make use of existing projects um, in Google, I can pick the ones that I have here. And so you'll notice that these projects aren't from the Firebase project, but what this is from is my Google Cloud account. So that's something some of you might also want to note down as a good thing to learn later on in the future. Google Cloud, of course, is Google's cloud hosting service that provides similar functions to AWS. But we don't need that now. I just need that for Firebase. And I'm getting the warning again that blah blah blah. Uh, I'm at my limit. I'll delete some of my stuff. Later on, there used to be no limit, pero marami nang gumagamit, so it's like that. Um, if I'm not using any of my existing projects, um, Google or Firebase will pick up the name of this project in Android Studio and use it as the suggested name. So normally, it would be helpful if you do the same. Pero kung trip mong palitan, nothing stops you. I'll use the same name as my Android project. Click on continue. The next thing it asks me is, do I want to enable Google Analytics for this project? It's recommended to do it because once you integrate your project with Google Analytics and the app is distributed to users, you can study user patterns using Google Analytics. So I normally have this on by default. Then I'll click on continue. So the last thing is to accept the Google Analytic terms of service as well as have settings for analytics data. If you're not sure about this, you can uncheck and then you'll see yung check for that. Um, So basically, what I'm doing is I'm allowing Google to be able to access my data in case they need it for benchmarking, technical support, and Google account specialist. So those are the three steps. Then I'll create the project now. It will do some processing. So we'll just wait some more. So now that it's done, the project is ready. I'll click on continue. So then the next thing it will do is go away from that screen and then load the app's homepage, or sorry, the Firebase Project's homepage. And there's a dialog box that's spinning. So since the project is created, the next thing that it needs to do is send configuration information to my Android project. So that's the screen here, and I'll just click on connect. If you don't do this connect, this dialog box in Android Studio will not disappear, and of course your project will be unable to connect to the database. So we want it connected. So notice that the that dialog box disappeared. We also get at the bottom right corner a notification from Android Studio that this is now connected to Firebase. So, so this one we can leave for now, but I'll keep that open. The next step that we have for this is adding the SDK to the app. So again, recalling that in the essence of saving resources, Android doesn't really load all of the libraries, only the needed ones. Firebase has about 4 or 5 libraries that it needs. So you can import that yourself, or you let, and by import, I don't mean import here, but adding the actual libraries to your project files. Um, we'll let the assistant do that by clicking here. And then it will tell you ano yung additional lines na ilalagay niya sa Gradle dot sa Gradle na app level. So we'll see at the project level, it will add the plugin for Google Services. And then in the app level, build.gradle app, it will add a plugin and a library. So yung plugin is the Google Services plugin because Firebase goes through that for communicating with other apps. And then the Firebase library itself, that's built for Kotlin. So that's why it says Firebase Database KTX version 20.0.0. And I'll just accept the changes. So that really shouldn't be hard. You'll see Gradle doing an update at the bottom and rebuilding itself, and then importing the necessary data. So you now see this dependency set up correctly. Okay, so dati, when I get to this third step, if I remember correctly, I actually didn't need to do anything kasi ready na si Firebase. But now, after dependencies are set up, there's actually one file that gets added. So I'll open Project Explorer, switch the Android view to uh, project files view. And then we see this extra file. So nakalagay sa kanya Google Services.json. And when it gets opened, it looks like this one. So ano siya, Google Services.json is basically the configuration file that tells the app which Firebase project it's connecting to. So yung important dito is actually this first item because it gives the project number and project ID as well as the actual storage location in Google for this. And then the other items that we have here are the actual keys so that the app is allowed to connect to Firebase. So yan yung mga keys na yan. Since we have no database yet, the database info which should be here dun sa project info section isn't there yet. And that's what I meant earlier, that we have to change the configuration of some of the files without the URL to the database. Mag-error lang yung app natin because it won't know which database to talk to. So that's Google Services.json. And the next thing I'll do is I'll go back to Firebase. Refresh. So I have this now, Firebase Demo 21. I'll go to it. And I'll go to the section for real-time database. So real-time database. It's blank right now. So it only has the button for creating the database. And I'll do that. I'll create a database. Then you'll be asked where in the world you want the server to reside in. If you're doing a game, of course, you have to worry about hops and pings and stuff like that. So it's better to pick an Asian server. So that's what I'll do. I'll pick Singapore as my server location. Then I'll click on next. And then it will ask me, what rule do I want to implement? So if you start it in lock mode, you won't be able to read and write. So we get the second one, test mode. We can change this again later if we need to. The great thing about Google suggested test mode is it gives you an expiration for the login. So you'll only be able to access um, the database if you fall within the particular date range that's given here. So I'll pick that one, test mode. Uh, I ah I hate my mouse. I don't know why it's broken. So this one and this one, test mode, and I'll select enable. So this is now our Firebase database. Yan. And later on, when we go through the app, um, we'll see data being written here using the sample code here. Yan. So, ano yung next dyan? So, this is almost ready except uh, oops, nag-shortcut ako. I'll go to the project settings. And then I'll go scroll down and look for this one. So ano to, this will always contain the latest version of Google-services.json for your application. So I'll download this. I'll just name this 21. And once it's downloaded, I'll open this. So ito siya. And then I'll open Google Services.json here. And I'll compare yung first na item, which is project info. So if you guys are looking at this, you most likely will notice that there's this one extra line with the Firebase URL. So you might be wondering, sir, saan galing yung Google Services JSON na nandun sa project? So this one came from our initial connection to the Firebase project. At that point in time, wala pang database, real-time database that was created. So it's not in the Google Services JSON file of the app. And to fix that, you can just copy everything, paste it here, or what I do is I just copy the missing line, go to my file, and then paste it. So yun lang. So keep in mind, guys, this final step needs to be done to ensure that it points to the correct Firebase database URL. And I'll close Google Services.json. I'll go back to the Android view for this one. And I'll open up the assistant again. So while I'm doing these questions or clarifications, guys, And so I'm going here. The next thing that I'll do is test if I actually have that connection. And that's the reason why I opened the assistant. So I'm done with steps 1 to 3. Um, and I now want to test it. So I'll get this right database code. I'll just copy that and I'll paste that in on. I hate my mouse. And paste it here. Import, import. For just 3 lines of code. And what I'll do now is I'll run this. Uh, and also I'll bring this up. So real-time database. And then we have this. I'll run this. And so if you were watching the browser, you'll notice that my app runs here. We haven't really put in any XML for the user interface, so it just shows the default hello world. But we also see that it gets written here. If we go to the code, so only 3 lines. The first line just gets a connection to the Firebase database, and it knows what to get because it gets that from the Google services.json file. I'll just bring that up. Uh, Yan. So because I added this line, alam na, so alam na nito what to get when we do Firebase.database. It just refers to that entry in Google services.json. And then we're getting a path to a child node called messages. So yan. That's a child node of the actual database. If I stop and I run this again, so it will always keep writing to that path. So very quickly now I know that my app is connected to that Firebase database. So now we can add in the other things. I closed my PowerPoint. So the next thing I'll do is just go through the sample app that's also in the PowerPoint. So if you guys have this downloaded, and so we're done with that, done with that. And so first thing we'll do is update strings.xml because the user interface will make use of a couple of the a couple of the strings here. So I'll copy this. Sometimes PowerPoint inserts weird items into your code. So like this one. Ah, so yun lang, when you're copying from PowerPoint, just be careful because sometimes PowerPoint inserts extra figures. I'll go back here and go to resources, value strings.xml. So, so to make it easy, if it does something like that, I just select all the code and then code uh, reformat code. So it gets here. So ito yan. These 5 items will be used by the XML to refer to those values. If we go to the app, ay, teka lang. So ito yan exactly. The dummy name and dummy mobile are the first two controls on top. And then ito yung hint. Enter name data, enter mobile data, and then update user info. So this XML is actually how the proper way you put items in the text attribute. Because what Android will tell you is in case you want to support internationalization, um, you create separate strings files for each language you want to support. So strings, and then I'll do it for the XML. I'll just I'll just open the file that I have that already has this, and I don't need to edit it much. But again, if you're copying from the PowerPoint, make sure that you paste to Notepad first so you see yung mga problems and then edit it out. So next that I'll do is activity main.xml. I'll just split this so you guys can see. Delete all of this and then paste it. So very quickly, that's how it's going to look. We have two text views on top. Then we have your to edit text. There's an extra item called text input layout. So that immediately does a few stuff like this to make it stand out. That includes the hint part, which remains on top. That happens because of it being in a text input layout. And then the last one is a button that connects to do update function later on. So that should be fine. The next thing that we need, and the usual is um, a model class to hold data. In this case, it's user info.kt. So I'll just add it up here. So new Kotlin class, user info. And then this one is actually short. So I'm actually and so it's a it makes use of the Firebase data class item. So this is a data class. It just holds ang tawag dito, two attributes, a name and a mobile number. And then the last thing that I have to do is add to main activity. So for main activity, uh, we'll make use of view binding. Oops. So before we get to on create, just a couple of things. And so three variables, one for view binding that we've seen before, another one for the database reference, CDB reference, and then another one for a variable called user ID, which we'll use later when we're recording information. Um, so for view binding, I'll just comment out the set content view because we will replace it with this one. And then we'll change those existing lines to initialization of the database. And so that completes our on create. So first is the update function. And then it will make use of create user and update user, which will add next. And then create user. So you'll notice add user change listener is red because we haven't coded it yet. So update and then create. And the next one is the much more longer one, which is adult change. Adult user add user change listener. And then yung very last one is a toggle for and so a toggle that will save yung text in update user button to save or update. And then I'll try to run this now. Before I run it, so going through the code again in on create, we did view binding, which we discussed the past few weeks. Then we initialize a database object variable based on Firebase database. We got a reference to a node. So walang concept ng tables, but each data point is considered a node. And our node for users contains two pieces of information, the name and the phone number. Uh, if we obtain anything, we get a user ID from it by getting the key column of the, well, it's not a column, but the key piece of information for that particular JSON object. Do update will call create user, and that's made possible by userinfo.kt. And then update user is the same thing, except we're checking if text utils is empty, then it performs whatever it needs to perform on the so yung child dito is the node inside Firebase. So yan, this is a child of the database. And then we have create user, which uses set value. And we have this important one, yung change user, add user change listener, which is called in update user, refreshes the information on the page. So I'll run this. And so that's how it starts. So dummy name, dummy mobile, and then I'll enter name data. Uh, wait, let me fix this so we can. So this is our blank database. Well, not so blank because message is there. So now this says dummy name and dummy mobile. If I run this, or if I click on the button, so we see this gets added here, and we have our information here. And so very quickly, and then the reason why it gets reflected here is after I call update, it calls add user change listener. And then it says add user change listener. This will, ito, from the closing parentheses up to sentinel parentheses. Ito. So, itong part na to creates a value event listener connected to the database. So, when a save is done, a value has changed. Or sorry, yes, when a save is done, a value changes. So, this gets called. This will take. And so that very quickly is how Firebase can be used. It's not an extensive display of the abilities of Firebase, but hopefully that gives you something to start from in terms of curiosity and as a base for your own experiments in using Firebase. With that being said, questions, comments, or violent objections? And so I know you guys must be getting a ton of work because we're about to end the term. So I won't keep you guys long. Please do check out Neo for the Dropbox with regards to the finals. If there are questions, do send me a message. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you guys for joining me here. I hope you guys pick something up. If you want to review it, get the PowerPoint from Neo, and later today I'll be posting the recording of this session. So thank you everyone. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. So you may all log off now. Enjoy the cold weather. Hopefully hindi nag-brown out sa inyo, pero kung brown out then that means you're not here, or you guys can enjoy the bad weather. So, yun. Thank you again everyone.